I met Bill Daniels in 1987 when he wanted to start Young Americans Bank. Now, I'm a recovering banker by training and had spent time in both large and small banks. And in the 80s, things weren't quite beautiful here in Denver. And I started my own company at that time to work with banks who were either with investors who wanted to start new banks or banks who were in regulatory problems of one sort or another. Suffice it to say, the business was mostly banks who were in trouble. But along came this guy named Bill Daniels, who was working with the state of Colorado saying, I want a bank for kids. And they're going, yeah, right, buddy, sure. Do you understand how regulated banking is? Do you understand how hard this is going to be? And long story short, 2.5 years later, the bank commissioner said, get somebody who knows what they're doing to get this thing open. So they called me, and I met with Bill, and he said, do you know what I'm trying to do? I didn't know Bill Daniels. I said, well, I read it in the paper. And he said, so what do you think? I said, well, it's going to be kind of hard to make money on a bank for kids. And he was so offended, you cannot believe it. He said, what makes you think I am trying to make money off of kids? And I said, well, pardon me, but I've never really met anybody who wanted to start a bank that would probably require capital injections forever. And he said, well, you have now. So we talked for a while longer, and Bill said, can you help me or not? And I said, well, why don't you tell me a little more about where you are in the application process, and we'll give you a proposal. And in Bill's colorful language, he said, I don't want a proposal. Can you help me or not? And I said, sure. And he said, what's it going to cost? And I said, a lot. He said, you're hired. So that's how I got to know Bill early on. You got a glimpse of him in that early stage, and at that point I was a consultant. I was just trying to help them get the charter. And I thought he was a little crazy, to be honest with you. And over a couple of months' time, as his vision for helping young people understand the power of our free enterprise system and how they can be part of that really captured my imagination as well. So Bill Daniels was the sole shareholder of the bank, so he injected capital every year because of the losses. So as we do his estate planning, he says, well, the Daniels Fund can own the stock to the bank. I said, no, that won't work. That makes the Daniels Fund a bank holding company. That's not a compatible combination. Well, what are we going to do? So we create a companion nonprofit, Young Americans Education Foundation, so that Daniels Fund can make a grant to a 501c3 who can have a wholly owned subsidiary and have capital injections. Sounds pretty reasonable. You cannot imagine what that took from a regulatory standpoint to get that done. So I called Bill the day we were sending the applications out, and the application had to be in Kansas City, Dallas, Washington, D.C., and Denver on the same day, different regulators. And I said, I've done everything I can think of to grease the way for this. So the applications, except for deliver it in person, and the applications go in. He says, what'd you say? And I said, you don't deliver applications in person to the Federal Reserve Board and the FDIC. And he said, why not? I said, well, they're kind of like the IRS. They're kind of faceless people. They don't want to do that. Bill says, call them and ask them if you can deliver it in person. I'll call the pilot. 20 minutes later, we were heading to Washington, D.C., where we dropped off these applications. So that was the way he thought about things when he wanted to get them done. Another story back in the bank days, student loans. So as we did the forecast for the bank, I'm thinking, what are we going to have, hamster cages and prom loans or, whatever. Maybe we could have student loans. Seemed like a natural fit. So we go out and hire the best person we can find to build student loans, and we built them immediately. And somebody says to me, how do you get around the 50-50 rule? And I said, I do not know what the 50-50 rule is. Well, it wasn't a bank regulation. It was a Department of Ed reg that says for every dollar that you have in student loans, you must have at least that much in consumer loans. Well, in any other bank, you've got mortgages, you've got everything else that count. We had hamster loans. And so I called the bank commissioner and said, forgive me, Father, for I've sinned. What do I do now? And he said, I don't have any idea. I never heard of it. So he checks it out and calls me back, and he says, it's fairly serious. If you don't correct this, they could shut the bank down. And I said, got it. Sell the portfolio. So a couple days later, I'm talking to Bill on some other stuff, and I said, by the way, we're going to have to sell the student loan portfolio, and I explained the difference. And then in the banking world, for those of you who aren't in it, if you don't have the loans, you put the money out in investments. We're not talking about much money at all, probably more on the investment side. Bill says, I am disappointed in you. Not what you ever wanted to hear from Bill. And I said, well, I'm disappointed in myself too. It's just not anything I've had any experience with, but we have no choice. And he said, you are solving the wrong problem. I said, can you say a little more? What are we talking about here? So Bill says, change the law. Well, up to that point, we had received probably 15 unprecedented bank regulatory exceptions. So this was a piece of cake to him. This was why it was so much fun for me. I said, Bill, this one is the U.S. Congress. We are talking about the Reauthorization Act of the Higher Education Reauthorization Act. It is one line in a book the size of what used to be the Denver telephone book. He said, what is your point? So I got a call from his attorney that afternoon who said, I've been reassigned to you. We're going after a student loan exception, which 5 years later we got. Did we make another student loan? No. Did Bill care? No. What was his objective? He wanted me in Congress testifying about the importance of financial literacy for young people, which was the whole point of the bank.